Okay, so it's 12 o'clock, so we're going to get started. Welcome to Alumna Project. We're pleased to be hosting this session for alumni, postdocs, trainees, and friends of our master's and PhD programs here at the Faculty of Medicine and Dentistry. First, let me start by acknowledging that the University of Alberta is located on Treaty 6 territory and respects the histories, languages, and cultures of First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and all First Peoples of Canada, whose presence continues to enrich our vibrant community. My name is Vanessa Curious, and I'm a volunteer with the Alumna Project. I'll be your host for the session. The Alumna Project is part of the Faculty of Medicine and Dentistry. It's an initiative that creates space and provides programming for networking and connection. This session is part of the Career Incubator webinar series, one of the many Alumna programs. This series profiles alumni from FoMD programs, so all the different departments, as they discuss the nooks and crannies of their career paths, how they got there, and their experience. You'll be amazed by the diversity of places that a lot of our alumni have gone and the people they've met and the places they've explored. There are other ways to be involved with the Alumna Project. We also have the Coffee Break series, so this offers members a chance to expand their personal network by meeting with a few small community members in a small group format. For the time being, these will be virtually over Zoom. And then each coffee break session is hosted by one alum member. So typically it's a speaker from the Career Incubator webinar series. So we are pleased to be hosting one of those coffee chats with our speaker from today, Katie Bone, on May 26th from noon to 1 p.m. Registration details can be found on our website, as well as in the follow-up email that you will receive tomorrow. Additionally, you can connect at your own pace with our members through the switchboard. This is the U of A's online career connection tool, or get involved in our mentorship program. Currently, several AlumLab members are participating in the Alumni to Alumni Mentorship Program, which kicked off a few weeks ago. Mentee applications for this program will open again later in the year in December, so keep in mind this program and look out on our on the website. The AlumLab website has more details of everything I mentioned today, so be sure to check that out. So today we're thrilled to be hosting this fireside chat with Dr. Katie Bone. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be available after the event for those who may have missed it live, or if you have any friends you want to share the link with who you think might be interested in the webinar. A number of questions were submitted in advance through the registration forms for this session, but feel free to use that Q&A box to submit your questions live. So I want to get started on the introductions to our speakers. First, I would like to introduce Dr. Kathleen, or Katie Bone. So she's the Director of Clinical Cytogenetics and an Assistant Professor in Pathology at the Medical College of Wisconsin in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Katie completed her PhD in Laboratory Medicine and Pathology at the University of Alberta in 2014, and then went on to complete a Canadian College of Medical Geneticists Clinical Cytogenetics Fellowship in the Department of Medical Genetics at the University of Calgary. After working briefly in Canada, Katie relocated to Milwaukee in late 2018. Her clinical laboratory practice focuses on both cytogenetic and molecular assays to aid in the diagnosis, prognosis, and treatment decision-making for a wide variety of cancers, as well as for prenatal, postnatal, and infertility patients. Interviewing Katie today is another AlumLab volunteer, Dr. Mariam Hijazi. Mariam is a PhD graduate in medical genetics from the University of Alberta. She obtained her bachelor and master degree in cellular and molecular biology in Iran. She is currently working as an industrial postdoc at the Canadian company Entos Pharmaceuticals. At Entos, they develop next-generation nucleic acid-based therapies using nanoparticle medicine delivery platforms. She's also co-host and founder of The Science Brief, a podcast and Instagram page talking about cool science facts. Mariam and Katie, I'm so excited to hear the conversation today and learn about Katie's career path, and I'll turn it over to you now. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Vanessa, for the introduction. So thank you, Katie. It's a pleasure to have you here with us. So yeah, Vanessa gave us a short introduction and bio about yourself. However, I would like to hear from you. can you tell us a bit more about yourself, your story, your journey on U of A, and how did you end up in your career as a director of clinical lab?
Sure. So thanks everyone for having me today, and I'm really looking forward to talking to you. So I did my undergrad at the University of Ottawa in biopharmaceutical science, which focused on genomics, and that was a relatively new field at the time, or a new program at that university. Then I completed my master's. As a lot of us realize, once you've been in school for so long, you just want to keep going into school. So I found a good lab at the U of A to do my PhD in. This lab was Dr. Raymond Lay's lab. And during my PhD, I studied a rare type of lymphoma that was characterized by a recurrent cytogenetic or chromosome abnormality. About halfway through my PhD, in discussing with my PhD supervisor, he suggested a clinical fellowship program to me, which I had never heard of before. So that kind of spurred me on into kind of doing a little bit more research. I had actually intended on applying for a clinical biochemistry fellowship. In doing so, however, I found the clinical cytogenetics fellowship program, and I thought that that would be a way better fit. So I applied. I worked really hard to finish my PhD in the little amount of time that I had left, and I was really happy and lucky to be accepted.
Okay, great story. So your research during your PhD was related to genetics, right?
Yeah, so I studied DNA mismatch repair signaling in a type of lymphoma, like I said, that has a tyrosine kinase that's that's constitutively active, and it's characterized by having this recurrent chromosomal abnormality. So although genetics wasn't necessarily the focus of my PhD, my supervisor was a hematopathologist. A lot of what clinical cytogenetics focuses on is heme paths. So it kind of did give me a little bit of an intro into that field.
Okay, so your supervisor was kind of involved in same clinical labs career path?
A little bit. He was more of a pathologist that focuses on diseases that have recurrent cytogenetic abnormalities. So he actually suggested, because I have never really been a huge fan of, I really enjoy research, but I don't like everything that comes along with it, like applying to grants and writing papers. And I felt like it was a lot of work and not necessarily, it can be rewarding, but there's a lot of downsides to that career as well.
Okay, yeah, mentioning that. So you were feeling you can do better in outside academia, and then you kind of found out about this job. And so you're currently the director of a cytogenetics lab. So I want to know and tell our audience that about your field, like your day-to-day job, what does it look like, what special skills you do, and what are the good moments, challenges, so we get to, our audience get to know what this career look like and what is the differences between like academia.
Sure. So for those of you who don't know, clinical cytogenetics focuses on chromosomal abnormalities. So we're all born with 46 chromosomes, and some of us are born with potentially chromosomal abnormalities. So I study constitutional, or those abnormalities that we're born with, and then also cancers and other diseases that are characterized by these recurrent cytogenetic abnormalities that are both prognostic and diagnostic in specific areas. So some examples would be like a prenatal diagnosis of Down syndrome, or CML with a 922 translocation, like a BCR-ABL oncogenic tyrosine kinase translocation. So because of that, it's a very specialized field. So I did do a 2-year fellowship in that in Calgary. So the specialized skills that come with that is you kind of get like a little crash course in medical genetics, but also acquired genetic abnormalities as well. So the day-to-day life for me, I come in, there's a stack of cases that the technologists have worked on. So we have technologists that specialize in chromosome analysis and fluorescent in situ hybridization analysis. And these are real patients that are seen by a clinical team in the hospital. And I'm one of the few careers that PhDs are making impacts to the clinical care of these critically ill patients in some instances. So like I said, I have these cases, so I need to understand what the abnormality means in the context of the referral of the patient, understanding maybe the clinical course of the patient, and then I recommend follow-up testing as needed. And I also write reports and interpretations that get incorporated into patient care. So besides that, I am an assistant professor as well. Because I'm in a clinical lab, I don't have to be writing grants and doing research, but I still do that, more of a clinical focus. So with that, I teach residents and fellows in pathology department, medical genetics, med students kind of who may have an interest in clinical pathology. So it's busy. It's very busy. And I think that it's also really rewarding. I think a lot of times you forget that next to that lab result is a patient. So what I'm giving out is important for both the patient and then the clinical team. And you kind of forget that when you get bogged down in everything. On top of that, there's a lab that I direct, so I have to make sure that we're following QA and QC, following any regulatory guidelines, ensuring that everything is up to regulations, and it's a lot. It can be really busy, but at the same time, it's also a really rewarding career in that sense.
So basically, you are doing everything someone in a faculty position does. With extra meeting, patient care, and then just you don't write grants. You still teach, right?
Yeah, I still teach.
And you still have students?
I still have students. It's a little bit different than a regular lab because I don't have a student that's in my lab all the time. So these are rotating students who may have interest in clinical pathology or need to learn about cytogenetics for their career path.
Okay, and then you write a report yourself. Do you meet physicians?
Yeah, so I interact with a lot of physicians. In the US, there's a lot of physicians' assistants as well that I interact with, clinical fellows, and other pathologists within the field. And so I interact with them, discuss maybe some intricacies of what I found. The only difference is I don't see a patient. So I can be consulted on patient questions, but I don't talk to the patient directly.
Okay, but still when you think of your job, you still work on patient samples. So you get that feeling that you are just directly connected with the patient, right? In terms of emotional feeling, I mean.
Yeah, and you're making, like a lot of the times what I see that's really interesting is often not a good thing for the patient. So we're helping to give diagnoses that may be difficult or life-threatening. And I think that it's a high stress situation for the patient. And I recognize that a lot of the times I'm not giving it good news, but I think in the end, you're positively impacting the patient's clinical trajectory, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I got it. So yeah, it sounds really demanding job, even more than a faculty job. So how do you manage this heavy workload, stress, life? I'm guessing it's lots of long hours, right?
So I am a big proponent of work-life balance, and I actually won't. So I should go back and say during my fellowship, I had one rotation training director who told me, you just need to get used to the fact that you have work that isn't done. So he's like, you're going to leave at the end of the day and still have work to do. And for a lot of us, that's scary, right? Like you don't want to leave work unattended and know that you have something there waiting for you. But it's kind of like a PhD. You know that you have to get stuff done. You know that you need to do like 20, 30 experiments to get to the end. You're not going to do them all at once. So I think it's a lot of prioritizing and then just saying to yourself, okay, this is when I'm going to cut off, because I have a family and I want to go home and enjoy my time with them. The one thing is it's still really difficult for me sometimes to turn my brain off. I am always thinking about work to the detriment of myself and my well-being at some points too. But I think just recognizing the fact that like what we do is important, it's stressful. And I just know that if I leave it, realistically, it doesn't matter if I sign something out at 7 o'clock at night or 7 in the morning. Like it's just, I need to come up with a way to kind of set that aside, which I'm still working on. So if anyone has any tips, I'm all yours.
Great. Yeah, I guess all of us have to work on life-work balance these days. But yeah, your job sounds really interesting, demanding, but as you said, also rewarding. So yeah, you mentioned this clinical lab career option. You didn't even know it until later in your PhD studies, and it was the same for me. So. And might be from our audience. So I'm guessing lots of our graduate students does not know about this career path until later, or they never ever heard of that. So could you tell us more about how someone interested in career path, how do they pursue it, and how does it start? Because you said your supervisor introduced it to you. And let's say if your PI does not do that. So how someone is interested and it's in grad school or even like in undergrad, how do they pursue this career path?
Yeah, so I think for me, I kind of just stumbled across this particular fellowship. And I know that that's not the case for everybody. It is a very, it's a small field and it can be really difficult to get into it. I think that there's a little bit of a disservice done to us in our PhD because we're constantly being told about academia and industry, and we're not necessarily told about these other things that PhDs can do. Like I didn't know that PhDs can direct labs in the hospital and work with a clinical team in the way that I am doing it now. So there are a few careers like that: clinical cytogenetics, molecular genetics, clinical chemistry, clinical microbiology. So I think just I did a lot of searches to see where these fellowship programs were offered. The difficult thing is that because it's such a niche field, and these are clinical labs and they're clinical samples that we're working on. It's really difficult to kind of get your foot in the door. It's difficult to volunteer because, like I said, it's a clinical lab. It's a little bit different than a regular lab. I think part of it is making sure that through your career that you have a good set of people around you. So like mentors and people that are willing to help you and give you the references that you need and kind of bolster up your CV so that it can differentiate you from someone else. So I didn't do a postdoc, which is very rare in this career field. And I think it's to the point where you definitely have to do a postdoc to get in now. I think I was really lucky in the sense that I didn't do one. But I think trying to find a postdoc that may have a little bit of more of a clinical focus or clinical relevance would probably be useful. But it's not easy, and there's not very many positions. The field's really small. There's a lot of people that want to do this. So you also need to recognize that there's very few positions. They're all over the country. So you need to be, or all over the US, even North America, Canada, elsewhere. So you need to be willing to pick up and go if that's really what you want to do, which I think for a lot of people is hard.
Okay, so you yourself did not do a postdoc, but do you recommend other people that find a postdoc that are related to the clinical genetics or molecular genetics if they are interested in this field?
I think so, because there's a lot of positions now where they are looking for people who have postdocs. So because there's a lot of independent study and you're learning a lot on your own in your clinical fellowship, the postdoc just shows them that you're able to do that a little bit better. Also, it increases your team of people around you that know you. So the more places you move during your training, so if you stay at one school the whole time, not that I'm saying you have to go schools, but I'm just saying I moved multiple places kind of across the country, and I think it opened me up to growing my network so that people knew me and they knew what I do and what I'm capable of doing. So it gives you more of a diverse network of people that can help you with references.
So the postdoc is not equivalent to fellowship. These are two different things.
Yeah, so postdoc is not equivalent to fellowship. And then the only difference between the fellowships now versus when I took them is that when I took it, it was a 2-year clinical cytogenetics fellowship, and now it's a 2 or 3-year laboratory genetics and genomics fellowship. So you're learning both cytogenetics and molecular genetics concurrently.
In one fellowship, you mean?
In one fellowship.
Okay. So people do not need to go to different lab for their fellowship.
No, and there are very few programs that are accredited across Canada, and you can get information on where to find these if you go to the Prospective Society web pages. So even doing a Google search, like how do I become this? I did one this morning just to see if I could do it, to see what would pop up. Like, how do I become this? And it came up with like, oh, you need to do this fellowship. These are the places you can do it. But they do exist, and they're interesting career paths.
So yeah, I would like to talk more about finding a fellowship, because as you mentioned, this is a small field in Canada. And then how did you find your fellowship? Any recommendation for networking? How did you apply for CCMG? And did you apply first and found your fellowship, or you just like started networking during your grad student and found the fellowship and then applied?
So I didn't actually start networking during my PhD to find a fellowship position. And also I went on to universities or areas that offer the clinical fellowship, and I applied to them, and then they help with your application to the CCMG. So essentially I applied, I got told, yeah, we'll take you into the fellowship program, and then they kind of help with your application to the CCMG. You can't apply to the CCMG without having a fellowship in place. And it's similar in the US. You can't apply to the ABMGG or the American Board of Medical Genetics and Genomics without having a place in particular that will take you. I think I was relatively lucky. Like I said, my PhD did have this aspect of clinical cytogenetics in it. And then during my PhD, I worked really hard to kind of increase the number of people and the diversity of people that I worked with. So not just in my faculty or not just in my program or department, but I tried to volunteer as much as possible, not even volunteering with clinical labs, but volunteering with like teaching or marking or just doing anything so that I could put that on my CV, right? Because the more you have on your CV, you need to differentiate yourself from someone else. Because essentially everyone who's applying for a fellowship is very similar to you, and you need to find a way to make yourself stand out, which can be hard. And I recognize that it's hard. And at the same time, I recognized that I was really lucky because, like I said, I wasn't even planning on applying to this fellowship. I didn't even think I would get it because I know that they're very competitive. So I think also recognizing that and going into it. And I know people who have applied year after year, they keep applying, and a few of them have gotten in now. The other thing that I could suggest, especially now, since a lot of stuff is online and virtual, if you're interested in something, you could try to go to one of the conferences and just get your name out there even. Certainly that's easier during, like when it's not COVID, because you can actually see people and talk to people face to face. But I think just showing your interest, like, yeah, I went to this conference about this field that I'm really interested in. Here's what I'm trying to do to get into that field. Like, and I know it's tough. So.
Yeah, so you are recommending that people who are interested in this path, they actually work on their CV to make it more competitive, because yeah, it is a small field. So you recommended to do volunteering. Is there any course you think they can take that makes them more competitive, or anything in a specific in your mind?
I can't think of anything like in particular course-wise, but just as an example, I had a medical student who's actually really interested in this career, and she reached out to me to ask if I had any clinical cases that she could help write up for us. And of course I do. I always have clinical cases. And she's a Medical College of Wisconsin student, so it made it really easy. So it kind of opened up that mentorship for me, and then for her too, because then she can say, hey, I'm interested in this career, and like, look what I've done in this career. So I think even finding mentors in similar careers, I have a lot of them. I continue to have them. I think they're invaluable for sure.
So is this path open for physicians too, or it's only for PhD students?
So it is open for physicians too. So MDs and PhDs can apply.
But then if someone has a master, the PhD is requirement, or?
Yeah, so PhD is required.
Okay, yeah, perfect, because people asked in the Q&A. So yeah, the first is PhD or a medical student, a postdoc recommended, but you did it without it, but because you need to learn more and make new connections, you recommended it. So after you finish your fellowship, how long did it take?
So my fellowship was 2 years.
Okay, and then how did you find your job? Can you like tell us more about the interview process, the connection you made, and how did you find your first position right after the fellowship?
Yeah, so I started looking for a position during the second year of my fellowship, which a lot of us do. Like, you start looking kind of year 2 very early on. And at the time in Canada, there were no positions open. So that's scary. So I ended up reaching out to my network that I had kind of built during my fellowship. So one of the ways I did that was I became a fellow member of the Canadian College of Medical Genetics, and I also became a fellow member of the American College of Medical Genetics, which I really recommend. And I reached out to people and said, hey, do you know of any positions that are open? Because chances are there are positions open. At the time, I could only work in Canada because I had yet to become certified to work in the US. So in reaching out to my network of people, I did find a job. It was the only job, and I applied for it. The interview process is a little bit different than typical job interviews, because especially when you're applying to an academic position. So you're required to do a 1-hour talk. In mine, I focused on an aspect, like a series of cases that had similar cytogenetic abnormalities. and my interview was a 2 or 3 day process. I don't really remember. And it's just meeting with people and getting to know people. I sat in a room, I had all these people walk in, they asked me questions, and then they walked out, and I met with a lot of people. And that's also very overwhelming on its own. So luckily,
a very intense interview process.
Yeah. So luckily that job I applied for, I did get offered it, which it's always a little bit difficult because you're finishing your fellowship and you're all excited and you want to start a career. Obviously, you didn't just go to school for 14 years to sit at home and not do what you went to school for, what you studied. And because Canada's small, like this field is small, but in the world of Canada versus the US, positions in Canada are very few and far between. So I think that because I needed a job, I felt a little bit of pressure to take it, and it didn't end up being a good fit for me at all, actually. So that's a little bit of a struggle, right? Because you're applying to what the only thing that's available for you, and yeah, it was tough.
Yeah, I remember you were mentioning before this that, as you mentioned, yeah, it didn't end up to be a good fit, and you had to leave your job, and then there was a gap, 8 months gap between your current position and then the previous job. So I guess like it might be so many people in your position. So if you do not mind, talk about it. Can you tell us more about your experience and your struggles, and how did you manage it? Because yeah, I feel like lots of people either go through it or might in future, hopefully not, but I mean, if you don't mind, if I will learn from you.
Yeah, so you're right that I kind of mutually decided to leave my last position because it wasn't a good fit for me. And I think the difficult thing for that, when it's your first position right out of, like, that was my first position right out of fellowship, my first real job since I started my undergrad. And it kind of wrecks your confidence a little bit. So I spent a lot of time without a lot of confidence. The good thing is like I had mentioned, I have a really strong network of people around me that are supportive of me and that I can talk to and really just like listen to me. And I talk to them, they know me as a person and they know the type of work that I do. And even just like talking to some of the things that went wrong, recognizing maybe what I did in that position, what the red flags I kind of ignored because, like I said, it was the only position that was available at the end of my fellowship. And then the other good thing that my position did for me was that they hooked me up with a career mentor. So after I lost my job, a couple weeks later, I set myself up with this career mentor. She really just was kind of an impartial third-party person that I could sit in her office and I felt completely safe to just tell her what happened, tell her why I feel the way I feel, which is a valid way to feel. And we kind of just worked through like what I'm doing to try to get myself through that, and even recognizing some of the physical things that I was doing that shut myself off from other people, which at the same time would shut myself off from being able to get a position. So I was very protective of myself, and I didn't, like I said, I didn't have a lot of confidence. So I kind of allowed myself to reset. I watched like this silliest TV shows on Netflix that I didn't even have to think about. I wallowed in self-pity, which is totally allowed. And then I decided, I'm lucky that I wrote my clinical cytogenetics exam in both US and Canada, so I can work in the US as well. While I was looking for positions, there was one job open in Canada and there were 30 plus jobs open in the US, and I just applied for all of them. I'm like, I'm going to apply for as many positions as possible. The career mentor, she helped rework my LinkedIn profile. So surprisingly, a lot of academic and clinical type jobs, clinical director jobs, are posted on LinkedIn. So a lot of times I would just find them because I'm doing a search. So obviously LinkedIn isn't necessarily made for people in science. So she kind of worked through my LinkedIn profile, suggested that I increase the circle of people that I knew on it. So I went from less than 100 connections to over 400 connections in a very short amount of time. I made sure that recruiters knew that I was open for offers kind of across Canada and the US. And that's how I got a couple of the interviews I had. So I was really lucky that I was able to interview for a clinical cytogenetics position through a hospital that was affiliated with Harvard. One of the things that came out of that interview was that I didn't get it because I was too shy, because I was trying to protect myself because of what had happened. But after that, like, why am I shy? I proved that I can do this career. I passed exams. I know what I'm doing. Just because something didn't fit me and my personality and the way I work doesn't mean I'm not going to find a place that fits my personality and the way I work. So that's kind of how I came across the position I'm in now. I still have a lot of struggles that I work through. I think a lot of us work through imposter syndrome on a daily basis. I think it's normal and it's valid to feel that way. A lot of times I feel like I have no idea what I'm doing on a daily basis, which is super fun. But I think that it's just, like I said, I have a very supportive husband. I have a very supportive family. I have a lot of good people around me that support me and know the type of person I am. So I think that really helped me moving forward. And it definitely pushed me through situations because there were periods of time where I wasn't going to keep going. I didn't want to do it because it was too stressful. So.
Yeah, very touching story. Thanks for sharing. Also, always silly shows helps. My favorite is Bachelor. It's my guilty pleasure, and I watch it and I text with my friends over it. So thanks for sharing it. So you worked on your LinkedIn. You said you increased your circle of connection. And I guess like after your first interview, you were really open and you used that interview to improve yourself, or just say like to use it as like in your benefit for your second interview. And then, so you surround yourself with the good and supportive people.
Yeah, and so I actually asked for feedback from my interview when I didn't get the job. Well, you're allowed to ask for feedback. The worst that they can say is, no, I don't want to give you feedback. So I really recommend, if you're in that situation, to just ask, like, what did I do? What can I do differently? And then I think just when I applied for my job here, I was very open, like I am. I'm a very open person. And I told them that this is what happened, kind of in a nutshell. I don't have a lot of confidence. I need to be somewhere that recognizes that in me and helps me build it up still, because you can only do that so much yourself. You definitely need to have good people around you to help with that.
Yeah, also someone said spend their evening before medical school interview watching Muppet Take Manhattan and laughing herself sick. So I guess it's not you, everyone does it. And it's helpful.
I spent the night before my one of my clinical exams in the bath with some wine. So that
oh, I forgot about wine. That's always helpful too.
Yeah.
Always.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have, more than I expected. We have several questions live and several few pre-submitted. So I'll go through some questions that people are asking here, if you don't mind answering them. So someone asked, after undergrad degree in physiology, what would you suggest apart from medical school?
Huh. That's a really difficult question. That's a good question. That's a really difficult question to answer, though. I think that, do you have something in physiology that you're really interested in? I think it depends. That could really go anywhere. I think it really depends on what is your interest and where do you see yourself. All of us kind of had that one class in undergrad or that one field in undergrad that we are all really interested in. For me, it was always genetics. I just never thought that I would be able to be in a career that used that interest. So I don't know. I think that you definitely have to maybe sit down and come up with what your interests are. I think that's really hard, especially in undergrad. I think a lot of us struggle. So
yeah, definitely undergrads is, it's a hard decision because you're going to go to grad school or medical school, which are both are long, and yeah. So Emily asked, hi Katie, I'm interested in both the clinical biochemistry and clinical genetics flow sheet. I am not sure which would be a better fit. It seems like the clinical biochemistry training is a little more structured with rotation and specific objectives for each rotation, which I find appealing. My understanding is that currently genetics fellows are dual trained in cytogenetics and molecular genetics. Where can I find more information on the structure of the program?
Yeah, so I think that a lot of the programs actually vary based on where you're going to. So you can get a little bit of an idea from the structure of a training program if you happen to know someone who went through that training program. For example, like my training was pretty structured, and rotations did have objectives and clear guidelines as to what I needed to know. But a colleague of mine, hers was very unstructured and not as straightforward. So I really think that varies a lot depending on where you're going. And like I said, it also doesn't hurt to reach out to clinical fellowship training directors. On the Canadian College of Medical Genetics, it lists the contact information if you wanted to get some more information. Also, just because you apply and you get an interview, and if you get offered it, you don't need to take it. So like I always say, like, it doesn't hurt to apply for things that and then find out more information, which is what I did. I didn't know a lot about it. I applied for it, and then through the interview process, I found out more information.
Thank you. So also someone asked, I was wondering how useful is pursuing a MD on top of a PhD versus just a PhD for this kind of job, I guess.
Again, I think it really depends on what your end goals with it. So a lot of people who have an MD on top of, well, if you wanted to do this job and you had an MD, you could do this job. And a lot of the individuals who do that, the only difference is they could potentially see patients. I don't know, because I don't have an MD PhD. I can't really comment on that. I do know that a lot of the MDs, depending on where you end up working, there are some places, especially in the US, that like to have the MDs because there's issues with billing and issues, like a lot of like payment issues in the US, obviously. So sometimes it's easier for them to have MDs do the job than to have PhDs do a job. If your end goal is to do this position, both myself and friends or colleagues have always said, like, if that's what you want to do, then I don't really see why you would need an MD as well, unless you were potentially unsure and wanted to open up your doors. Because the thing is, doing a clinical fellowship it doesn't open doors for you, it closes doors for you because you become very specialized, and in some instances, a little bit too specialized.
Thank you. Okay, next one. Let me see which one we didn't answer. This one we kind of answered. So it says, what would you recommend during PhD to be a competitive candidate? Does award and studentship count a lot when applying? So I'm guessing he or she wants to know if applying for scholarship or award is gonna make you more competitive.
I think it does. Like, I am lucky that I had a lot of awards and studentships during my PhD and master's and undergrad. I think I mentioned it before. When you get to the point in your career, like, everyone is essentially at the exact same position that you are in. So you need to find ways that kind of put yourself over and above. Because I'm not on any of the hiring committees for clinical fellowships, I don't know specifically what they are looking for. But for me, in particular, I know I had strong references. So I made sure that I had good people that would give me good references. And genuine references. Like, I worked hard to get those references.
So Gaddafi asked, do you have to take extra classes during fellowship for students with PhDs from a different background? So I think he meant a course or something.
So they are more likely to accept you into a fellowship if you have a PhD in a related field. So I think not to say that you don't, like, that you definitely need one, because mine was in laboratory medicine and pathology, but it did have this peripheral relationship to hematopathology and clinical genetics. And I think that a lot of us who are in this field, that's where we have related training during our PhDs. So there's no extra classes.
Okay, but if you want to learn more, I'm guessing, right?
Yeah, like, it's a little bit different than PhDs. Like, there's no class. Like,
there's no credit, I guess you mean, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So someone asked, can you speak more about the process of getting certified to work in the USA?
Yeah, so the US and Canada has this reciprocal agreement where if you've studied in Canada, you can apply to write the US board exams. And if you've studied in the US, you can apply to write the Canadian board exams. So the training should be equivocal. So knowing that, and there are some places, some hospitals and places in Canada who accept only US board certification, but to work in the US, you need US board certification. So I went on to the certifying body, so that's the American Board of Medical Genetics and Genomics. You have to pay an application fee. There's a logbook requirement. So during our training, you have to see a certain number of cases, a certain number of clinical vignettes, kind of have a certain number of, like, DNA extraction, like sample setup. So there's a huge list of requirements, to kind of get accepted. And pay the application fee, filled out my logbook, which is what they call it. And then as long as you've studied at an accredited school in Canada, then you should have no issues working in the US. If you've filled out the application, ensure that your application is complete, and then there is an exam component to it as well.
Yeah, so I am gonna ask few of pre-submitted questions, and if we have time, I'm gonna come back to the more Q&A. So from those, someone asked that if you are a PhD student in a basic science, what things you can get involved to open up avenues in clinical research in postgrad?
That's a very good question, and it's a little bit difficult.
I thought it's a very good one. So
yeah, that's a little bit of a more difficult thing for me to answer. However, a lot of programs and universities have individuals who have research labs who do focus on clinical samples. So the pathology department here, for example, has a number of people who all they do is research on clinical components of, or there's always this clinical aspect, or there's people that they're researching on. So I think just maybe reaching out to some people if they're accepting new students, if they're accepting, even if you could come and just talk to them and see what it's like. I always say it doesn't hurt to reach out to people, because the worst they're going to say is no, or the worst they're going to do is just ignore you. So, and then you're whatever. I think that it's worth as much as possible to, like I said, build your network.
Yeah, always doesn't hurt to reach. I guess, like, yeah, as you said, for building network, the worst thing they say is they say no, or they ignore your email.
Yeah, exactly.
I guess, yeah. So someone asked that I lack doctoral experience, which is limiting my access to a clinical fellowship. Do you have any advice?
So like I said, I don't have a postdoc, but I think just reaching out to individuals, like I said, reach out to people and ask. I'm not, that's difficult for me to answer because I didn't do a postdoc. It's a very good question. If anyone has any, I don't know. Do you have any advice?
Oh, I guess like one way is like try to find a short postdoc, which is related to more clinical labs. Yeah, as you mentioned, it might not be not very much positions in that, but to get experience before fellowship and also be more competitive, it's always good to have a short postdoc, I guess, if you want a better chance to get in. Can you apply for postdoc in the state from here? I guess you can, right?
I think you can, as long as you can. Students
before fellowship, right?
Yeah, it's actually relatively easy, quote unquote, to work in the US as a student, to go to school in the US. It's not easy. It's just like on the scale of easy to hard, it's definitely on the easier side of things. There are work visas specifically for individuals who want to come study in the US.
So does a work experience makes you competitive? So I was wondering if like he or she works somewhere which is related to, I guess, clinical work. Does that make you competitive to apply for a fellowship?
I think it depends on what the clinical, what that particular clinical fellowship is looking for. But I do know some people who even worked as clinical cytogenetics technologists before they got into this field. So it's just showing that you're like, I don't necessarily think like it would be a bad thing.
I guess anything, it would make your CV competitive. Even if you work as a technician, as you said, in a cytogenetics lab, it means you have experience, you learned, and that experience helps you in your fellowship. So, okay, I am gonna wrap up. And for the last question, someone asked, what do you like the most about your job?
So I didn't really get into the ins and outs of what I do on a daily basis, but it's a lot of pattern recognition, and it's kind of fitting things together and finding where things are wrong and kind of solving these puzzles. And I really enjoy that. Like every single day I see something interesting and something new that maybe I didn't see before. And then the other thing I really like about my job is just the impact that I can make for patients. Like every day I'm making a positive impact in someone's life, and definitely rewarding. So.
Thank you, Katie. That was a great conversation. I myself learned a lot from you. I'm sure our audience feels the same. And I would like to thank you everyone for being here. And then now I turn over to Vanessa for final remarks. And again, thank you for your time, Katie.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Katie. That was great to hear about your career and life path, and I took a lot out of it too. And thank you, Miriam, for being such a great host. So before you go, I want to thank everybody who joined our live today for this session. We hope you found it valuable and will continue to connect with AlumLab community. This is the final webinar for this series of 2020 to 2021 for the Career Incubator webinar series, and planning is underway for 2021-2022. We're looking for your ideas and feedback, so tomorrow you'll receive an email requesting feedback from this session as well as the AlumLab project in general. So if you could please take 5 minutes to share your ideas on how we can make this more engaging and what you would like to see for the next year, that'd be really helpful. Please note that Katie will be hosting a coffee chat as part of the Coffee Break series on May 26th from noon to 1. And spots are limited, so this is meant to be a smaller group where you can kind of ask the questions that maybe you didn't get to ask today or learn a little bit more about this career path. A very small group format. It's really nice to get to know our speakers that way. So please sign up through the email that you'll be receiving tomorrow or through our website. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you at our future sessions. And thank you again, Katie, for coming out to speak to us today. Thank you, everyone. Have a good afternoon.